Tolkien describes fairies not as a being, but as a place. And in Blood Meridian's southwestern fairy inflected landscapes, we journey through the archaic duende manifestations of a new type of fairy. Long gone are the woodland English fairies that exist in green groves and rolling hills. Rather, we enter a liminal space that has no conception of the West's concept of good and evil or of God. There is a magical energy in the spaces between Tucson and the Sierra Madre Occidental and the Rio Grande and the other Sierra Madre Oriental, In the Chihuahuan and Sonoran desert, spiritual ecstasy is easy to come by, but darkness is just lurking around the corner at every step. I've lived in the Southwest my entire life. I live very close to the U.S. Mexican border, and the Glanton gang looted the area surrounding where I'm at multiple times. And I can tell you, this place is not the John Wayne Western romanticized promised land. This is a land of violence, even before humans occupied the land. And the American mind is not ready for this. As the kid enters Mexico in the Sonoran and the Chihuahuan desert for the first time, the Mennonites warn them. The wrath of God lies sleeping. It was hid a million years before men were, and only men have power to wake it. Hell ain't half full. Hear me, ye carry war of madman's making onto a foreign land. You'll wake more than the dogs. And when we look at Mexico's and surrounding areas' conception of fairies, they are called duendes. These do not look like the fairy princes of Europe. These are mischievous spirits that embody the trickster energy. When they surround you, you feel irrationality, earthiness, an awareness of death. The vibe is there, and a form of diabolical touch. What does that sound like, everybody? Well, it doesn't need to sound like anything, because McCarthy drops the F-bomb. When the Americans are drunk in the town of Jesus Maria, they are described as, quote, like fairybook beasts. Something to keep in mind. So when the kid first crosses into this liminal space, they do it over water. They cross multiple rivers. That is there has to be a barrier, right? But there is a barrier into this empty, dark desert landscape. So now we're going to read from Luke William Mills' paper, American Fairy. And his paper is the inspiration for this presentation. So of course, go check that out if you want a full literary criticism deep dive into this. Starting here. And they then enter a howling wilderness, which though lying under the same stars, the prairie wolves, so like in their yammerings, is yet all about so changed and strange. This land at night is like some demon kingdom summoned up, or changeling land. One of the men in the group describes their route as being on the high road to hell. The distant mountains seem like a land of some other order. They eventually meet some of the land's inhabitants, the Comanche, described as something beyond traditional classification. They are a horde from hell, much more horrible yet than the brimstone land of Christian reckoning. So the kid enters this land, and he is one of the few survivors. This is typical of some of these types of stories. You go with the group and then you are isolated. Cormac is telling us time and time again that we have left the Christian world, and fairies do not exist in Christian lore. Once the kid escapes, he's seeing hallucinations. He's being tricked, with the hallucination of water and oases. And yes, that is a common desert motif, but also very common in the Arthurian tales, for instance. The Mexican soldiers that captured them talk of, quote, witches or worse, and always they sought to parcel from the darkness some voice or cry from among the cries that was no right beast. So what is McCarthy talking about here? So we've now moved into this liminal space, this hellscape. This isn't a criticism of the people of Mexico, and like people always, sometimes say. And before we even get going, does the kid even exist? We're about to talk about the judge. Are they archons? Are they these archetypal figures? What is exactly happening here? That's the other side that, would make sense with more of them being fairies fit into the category of otherworldly beings. And we'd have to assume that McCarthy, who is very well read in the European, even the Joseph Campbell tradition, has a sense of the underlying soul of reality. He understands quantum mechanics. And even though he hates the interpretation of quantum mechanics, he shows us in Outer Dark, Sutri, obviously Blood Meridian, and The Crossing, a form of his theology. He quotes, who at the start of the book? Jacob Boehme, who's a famous German idealist who was the next step after Spinoza, leading toward Hegel and Schelling. And he was playing with the idea that God had a darkness to it, that God had an unconscious, and that unconscious was nature, and God realizes itself through nature. That German idealists were starting to play with these ideas of God being this dark figure, and obviously that starts with Spinoza's idea, and that breaks God past being just this monolithic or monotheist deity. And when you look at Mexico, I mean, just the whole Americas in general, there were obviously very dark shamanic practices. We could look at the Mexica, or AKA the Aztecs, and them sacrificing 100,000 people a year. Like, that's an easy example. But people, the Tohono O'odham, people all throughout the Americas were using psychedelic substances, using shamans, connecting with the darker energies, the darker spirits. Like, they were very involved with that energy. And we had cut that off for a long time. We had put that on the run forever. I mean, Christianity, you could say that was what it did to Europe, was it eliminated, these pagan cults. But in the Americas, we have a much more, much extremer environments, the Amazon rainforest, the crazy landscapes of the United States. And within these zones, you get something much different than you'd find in China or India. And the desert people of the Americas are very different than the Islamic, Arab nation people. That tradition got sent in a certain direction in Mesopotamia. And after that, for the last 3,000 or 4,000 years, even going back to Egypt, the desert mythology has been spoken for and directed and corrupted. But until the 1500s in America, the 16th century, that wasn't going on. And Blood Meridian is taking place hundreds of years after Cortez and friends came and colonized Central America. But when these soldiers, when we think of Glanton and the others get here, it activates something wild in their mind. This isn't the colonization of America and the beautiful valleys of Colorado. They are scalp hunters. These are men of violence looking for this, and there's no better place to go to find that, especially in the 1860s or whenever Blood Meridian takes place, than northern Mexico. You're still close enough to America to get back, and you're not deep enough in to South America yet to be in a whole other world. I've been reading a book right now. There was apparently this major Wild West cowboy period similar to all this going on in Brazil in the early 1900s, and that's been blowing my mind. And returning back to Luke William Mills' paper, American Fairy, this is not just a story based on the recollections of a rogue, but a meditation on American and human depravity. The predator-natural fairy-like landscape emphasizes the traveler's spiritual degradation as much as the physical. Few escape the perilous realm of the Southwest alive. The kid, a knight errant in more than one sense, does pull through alive, however, and is certainly changed as a result. No more does he appear to have a taste for mindless violence. Indeed, the penultimate chapter, he attempts to comfort and aid what he initially perceives to be an old woman who has survived a massacre. Later, when he kills a boy out on the Texas plains, he does so as a last resort in self-defense and tries to assuage his guilt by telling himself that the boy wouldn't have lived anyway. So the only other character who has maybe not an arc but has a presence throughout the novel is Judge Holden. And he embodies this idea of the Duende, of a very dark trickster energy very well. He dances, he can woo people, he plays music, he gives these crazy speeches, he knows all this knowledge, languages, he has this infinite energy. That's a really good trickster needs to be able to identify and transmutate into any role. He's the hybrid personification of Manifest Destiny meets the Sonoran Duende energy. And the Judge has many elements of the English fairy, of the classic idea of the fiddling minstrel who has feet that can, move very fast and dance. And in this famous passage in Blood Meridian, I'm assuming it's McCarthy is trying to depict that energy, this just complete alien and otherness, which as Westerners, so it's like we call this fairies. And it's important because this is, for a lot of us, this energy, whether it's Duende, whether it's fairies, all cultures have it. This has a certain embodiment and history. And this is McCarthy kind of showing this energy on full display with, just beautiful prose. Towering over them all is the Judge, and he is naked dancing, his small feet lively and quick and now in double time. He never sleeps, he says. He says he'll never die. He bows to the fiddlers and sachets backwards. He swings about and takes possession of one of the fiddlers, and he pirouettes and makes a pass. 2 passes, dancing and fiddling at once. His feet are light and nimble. He never sleeps. He says that he will never die. He dances in the light and in the shadow, and he is a great favorite. And to return to a more classic definition of fairy, and this is one I think McCarthy would know, is that there are the high fairies, especially in Tolkien's world, but just throughout it all. And these fairies are better than humans. They are stronger, they live longer, they are smarter. And returning to the text, the judge says, he held up a chunk of rock. He speaks in stones and trees, the bone of things, end quote. The empirical claim here is straightforward. Knowledge of the natural world is one's only access to God, who does not speak by special revelation. At the same time, the judge's expert knowledge of the natural world is suggestive of a naturalness in himself. He seems to have a more intimate or perhaps penetrating knowledge of nature. And this is 100% true because in the West, we have demonized nature. In Genesis, man has the right to rule over plants, animals, and the earth. Earth-based spirituality got eliminated by Christianity. That is taboo because people like myself who believe in an earth-based spirituality or accessing God, divine energy, whatever we want to call it, through the natural world, that's a foreign concept to modern religion that speaks to prophets and revelation, all these things of prescience. And McCarthy, by bringing up Jacob Boehm and his focus on nature itself, shows that he elevates it past not just to a character, the setting as a character, but granting nature sentience. The judge is the expert of this natural world, of, you could say, earth-based spirituality, the old ways. So what do you guys think? If you guys like this video, I have a sick interview over here about the different philosophical schools' relation to Cormac McCarthy. So it's a great McCarthy scholar, and I think you guys are going to love it. Peace.